Hello and welcome to Reading Philosophy with Ometa. This is a platform where we discuss philosophy and profound thinkers in philosophy. Today, we are going to discuss ethics, and I'm going to be reading my philosophy assignment on Philosophy 203. We've been asked to make a distinction between personal and social ethics. Philosophy 203. Introduction. To start with, what exactly is ethics? I've come across several definitions of ethics and noticed that emphasis was mostly made on some certain ways, either directly or indirectly. In fact, every definition of ethics I've seen so far seems to talk or emphasize on all, or at least one of the following 7 words, namely principle, value, moral, good and bad, or right and wrong. Observe the way these words are used directly or indirectly in the following definitions. According to our course manual, ethics concern itself systematic, critical, conscious, and rigorous reflections on the moral value that people live by. Another definition from Merriam-Webster states that ethics is a set of moral principles, a theory, or system of moral values. According to Britannica, ethics, also called moral philosophy, is the discipline concerned with what is morally good and bad, and morally right and wrong. The term is also applied to any system or theory of moral values or principle. The question is, does any of these definitions actually capture the full meaning of ethics? For me, I doubt if any of them did. Ethics, when examined from its origin, is far beyond a study of morality, and this will lead us to the assignment which instructs us to attempt a distinction between personal ethics and social ethics. But before I will continue, let me start by unveiling 3 figures I will be discussing their ethics in this assignment. It was from the notions, especially the number 1 of them, that I was able to figure out what is possibly personal ethics and social ethics. These 3 figures are Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. In what I called intellectual fatherism, Socrates was the father of Plato and the grandfather of Aristotle. Oh, well, let me break it down. Plato was a student of Socrates and Aristotle a student of Plato. This means that the foundation of Plato's philosophy is rooted in Socrates' philosophical thought. In fact, as a philosophy student or lovers of the Western philosophy, you might have read a lot about Socrates and you have a particular perception about him. The truth is that Plato played a very significant role in our perception of Socrates, and because most of the things Plato will later teach his students came from the philosophy of Socrates, Aristotle, who later becomes student of Plato, were impacted by this same knowledge. The ideas of these 3 great figures is the foundation of what we know today as the Western philosophy. Socrates, who continued his inquiry on the ultimate nature of reality from where those we often refer to as pre-Socratic philosophers stopped. Though Socrates himself did not publish or write any book, his students Plato and Xenophon took it upon themselves to put the philosophy of their teacher into writing after his death. So, as a student of Socrates, it could be said that Plato developed his own philosophical thought, quite different from that of Socrates, in the process of writing Socrates' philosophical ideas. I know this to be true because it does happen to me. Most of the philosophical ideas you hear me use in reading philosophy with Ometa and other social platforms came from the inspirations I got trying to analyze other people's philosophy. How do I know that Plato had his own philosophical ideas quite different from his teacher Socrates? There were instances in which Plato disagreed with some of Socrates' philosophy. For example, according to Socrates, all man must strive to discover the truth. Therein lies happiness and virtue. Plato disagreed with this assertion. According to him, the truth is only for the selected few, the intellectually higher class. Every other person must then know their lower places and accept the judgment of the intellectually higher class. Another example is how the two thinkers perceive and view the soul and body of human beings. You hardly hear Socrates talking about the body. He emphasized so much on the soul of the human beings than the body. Also, from the words of Socrates, you discover that he so much valued freedom, especially freedom from dogmatism and religious indoctrination and slavery. In other words, he wants people to be free from their false beliefs and self-deceits. Plato seems not to be interested in individual freedom, or perhaps he thinks that is impossible. He believed in a restrictive society, a society where some people or a class of individuals is held in high esteem. He believed when some people are above others in the society, everyone will have a specific role to play. Talking about justice, Socrates states that everything has a role to play and must play it well enough. He added that everything is characterized by a virtue that has a direct relationship with the performance of its function. Plato disagreed with this assertion and argues that injustice cannot be better than justice. According to him, each function is dependent on the community one found himself. That is, a person's function and his ability to carry it out effectively is highly dependent on the community in which the person lives. Question 1. A distinction between personal ethics and social ethics. Socrates' ethics. Now, let's look at Socrates' ethics and see what he thinks about personal and social ethics. Unlike others in the ancient Greek, who also taught that virtue is good both for the individual and for the community, these sophists would boast that they know what virtue was. Socrates, on the other hand, would say anyone who knows what virtue is will necessarily act virtuously. Therefore, those who act badly do so only because they are ignorant of or mistaken about the real nature of virtue. Virtue is something that can be known, and that the virtuous person is the one who knows what virtue is. Virtue could be known, he insisted, though he did not make an attempt to know it, nor did he teach his students how they should live. His teachings were basically a method of inquiry. He sees the destruction of any dogmatic belief or a belief that could not stand criticism as necessary and basic to the search for true knowledge. One can observe Socrates' ethics in his famous quote, "The unexamined life is not worth living." What Socrates means by this statement is that a life that has no introspection lack purpose of existence. In other words, to be a real human different from the beasts, we have to use our reasoning faculties to examine and scrutinize our lives. The ability to think is the major factor that distinguishes us from other animals. Sometimes we often ask people why they behave like animals, because we are aware that animals does not examine their life. Maybe if I say their ways of life, you will understand Socrates better. We eat, we walk, we sleep, we reproduce our young ones and die after our lifespan. The examination of our individual's life through reasoning is what makes the difference. No one loves to live in a chaotic or unorganized society. Every society is made of individual majorities who sought after love, peace, joy, happiness. Thus, if this is the case, that everyone in any society, irrespective of how troublesome you are, even Agboro, like to be loved, need peace, want to be happy, and enjoy good things in life, then it becomes necessary that the individuals that make up the society need to examine and scrutinize their lives to enable them create a society where him or her and others living in the society will be happy with. Some people have, however, questioned these statements by Socrates, arguing that by mentioning that all unexamined life are not worth living is unreasonable. For many, life in itself is worth living whether it is examined or not. But I consider this to be a selfish way of reasoning. Perhaps by chance you were able to acquire fortunes, because I am very sure no matter how hard, smart and intelligent you think you've worked to earn your wealth, there are people who have worked harder and even more smart and intelligent than you think you are, yet are still struggling to maintain metabolism. So because you are lucky to have the good things of life at your disposal does not mean that you should live your life anyhow and unexamined. Is this your purpose in life? If all you know in life is to work, eat, sleep and enjoy without thinking or examining how the life you live is impacting positively to other members of the human family, then it is not worth living. It is not far from the life of a beast. It is only animals that reproduce, hunt for food, and die after their lifespan. No matter how you live your life unexamined, it will still come back to haunt you. It is something that cut across all culture, that one of the ways to live a fulfilled life is to live a generation after you. If you live anyhow, what of the generation you left behind? They are coming to inherit a society where you live your life unexamined. A chaotic society, a society ravaged by poverty and other social phenomena that often lead to ridicule. Because it takes someone who examines his life often to retrace his or her steps and know how their actions affect them and the larger society. Even with the above fact, I am not yet sure that a selfish man has understood the fact that an unexamined life is not worth living. Perhaps the following will suffice. There is no way you will live in a democratic society with law and order and claim the possibility of living an unexamined life. Our today's world is ruled by democratic principle. This is the reason why we should even be more conscious of our existence in the society we found ourselves and how to engage meaningfully with the society. You cannot live an unexamined life in a democratic society because you are not an island. You need to constantly examine your life to know where your rights end and where other people's right begins. Otherwise, you will run into troubles. Because if you don't know your rights and purpose in the society you live or find yourself, people, including the government, will trample on your rights. And if you trample on other people's rights as a result of not examining your life, they will likely not to take it lightly with you. No matter your freedom and the liberty to live anyhow in a society, a lot of factors have shown that you need to constantly examine your life, otherwise you are not worth living. From our study of Socrates' ethics, we can observe that he laid emphasis on personal ethics as well as social ethics. When he states that an unexamined life is not worth living, he tries to define personal ethics as the moral principle and values that guides an individual's behavior and decision-making for his benefit and the benefit of the larger society. On social ethics, which I defined as a shared principle and norm guiding how members of a society behave. Remember, in his encounter with Sophists, Socrates told them that if they truly know what is virtue, they would behave virtuously. If there was nothing that the society agreed upon as right and wrong behavior, Socrates wouldn't have accused them of behaving badly if they really know what virtue is. This means that there is general knowledge of what is good and acceptable to the society and what is bad and unacceptable, that Socrates told them that if they really know what virtue is, they would have lived up to the expectation of the society as regards to what is right and wrong. For example, during our orientation at the matriculation ground, when we were admitted into the university, we were told the do and don't of the University of Ibadan, one of which is examination malpractice. If by tomorrow I go against the rule that govern the university, I am going against the ethics of the school. What I did may not be bad somewhere else or to even me as an individual, but within the university community, it is bad and morally wrong. So when Socrates was telling the Sophists that if they actually know what is virtue, they would act virtuously and not badly, he was speaking based on what is generally accepted by the society as good and bad, or right and wrong. Social ethics are those ethical principles that are generally accepted and agreed upon by members of the society, which are used to guide the behavior of individuals within the society. The law of a society is codified by the philosophical beliefs of the lawmakers of a society. This law is the basis of every social ethics and norm. Also, when we come together to form an organization such as religion, school, and other institutions, we often have rules and regulations that guide our behavior within the organization and beyond. These rules and regulations are also social ethics. Personal ethics, on the other hand, are those moral principles that guide your behavior as individual. Those things you personally consider to be right and wrong, but within the society it may not be. For example, you may consider people dancing naked on television as unethical, but society sees it as entertainment. Our personal ethics is mostly influenced by our individual religion, cultural beliefs, personal experience, and upbringing, etc. While social ethics is mostly influenced by the constitution of the land, our culture, organizational rules, our social gathering, religious gathering, etc. So basically, the difference between social ethics and personal ethics is that personal ethics are those principles that guide individuals to distinguish between what is morally right and morally wrong to him or her. Personal ethics may only apply to the individual that holds the beliefs. Social ethics, on the other hand, are those ethical principles that guide members of a society or organization, etc., to make a moral judgment between good and bad or right and wrong. The difference is that social ethics is largely subscribed by every member of the society, while personal ethics may be personal belief about ethical and moral principles. I want to give a little illustration of how personal ethics can be developed. You are a young man and you have a girlfriend. One day, you incidentally meet your girlfriend playing with another man. Then you walk to her and say to her, "Baby, so you've been cheating on me." Now, there is no place in the constitution of the country that prohibits single ladies from dating two or more men. Now, you are laying a claim on a girl you've not paid her bride price with a notion that he is cheating on you. And within you, such action is morally wrong. What if you live in a society where it is normal for single ladies to openly have as many boyfriends as they wish? You will surely grow up to see it as a norm. Now that you cannot find it anywhere in the Constitution that a girl must not date more than one man, where do you get that notion that seeing your girlfriend with another man is an unacceptable and immoral act? This is a personal ethics we developed as we interact with other members of our society. Over the years in your existence, you've seen either in a movie or in life people lamenting that their boyfriends or girlfriends are cheating on them because they had sex with another man, which to them is morally wrong. So as you observe some of these phenomena and the way they were judged to be either morally right or wrong, you developed your own personal ethics. So our personal ethics are mostly influenced by our surrounding environment. Question 2a. What is virtue ethics? Recall that at the introduction of this assignment, when I look into different definitions of ethics, I mentioned that ethics is beyond the study of morality. In the following discussion, we are going to discuss another thinker called Plato on ethics, but now on what is known as virtue ethics. It was from this man's views on ethics and his student Aristotle which we are going to discuss in the course of this assignment that made me think that ethics is far beyond the study of morality. Before now, I used to define ethics as a systematic study of morality, while morality, on the other hand, is an application of ethics, until I begin to read Plato and Aristotle to find out that both my own definition and other people's definition of ethics does not capture the full meaning of the discipline. So let's look at what Plato has to say. But first of all, let's start by answering the question, what is virtue ethics? According to our course manual, virtue ethics is the type of normative ethics which places emphasis on the moral status of a moral agent rather than a moral action. Of vital importance of virtue ethics are issues like character and a good life. Plato Ethics. Plato unarguably has been seen as the father of this oldest form of ethics that we are going to be discussing. As far as the Western ethical philosophical thought is concerned, Plato found the ethical language known as virtue ethics. As we will later see, Plato's ethics focus on virtue. Plato's virtue ethics established that what we call good is not dependent on the actions we take. His focus is on the person that we are. I suppose this is why our course manner sees virtue ethics as that aspect of ethics that places emphasis on the moral status of a moral agent rather than merely on a moral action. In other words, a virtuous ethicist focus is on what a good person is and not what good actions are. To Plato, actions are only good if the virtuous person takes such action. Justice exists in the individual if and only if the three elements of the soul, such as intellect, emotion, and desire, act in harmony with each other. The unjust person is always in an unsatisfactory state of internal conflict, always trying to overcome the discomfort of unsatisfied desire, but never achieving anything better than the mere absence of want. The soul of the just person, on the other hand, is harmoniously ordered under the governance of reason, and the just person derives truly satisfying enjoyment from the pursuit of knowledge. The highest pleasure comes from intellectual speculation. The human soul is immutable. Therefore, even if a just individual live in poverty or suffer from illness, the gods will not neglect him in the next life, where he will have the greatest reward of all. What Plato was in fact trying to establish is that those who are just are in the long run happier than those who are unjust. He asserts that we should act justly because in doing so we are at one with ourselves and with the gods. But the question is, what exactly is virtue to Plato, and how did he identify a virtuous person? Remember previously, we said that Plato's virtue ethics focus is on what a good person is and not what good actions are. We also saw similar assertion when we were defining virtue ethics from our course manual. We can trace what Plato meant by this by looking at his two basic schools of thought, namely Eudaimonia and Arete. The virtue that Plato preached that we all must aim towards is what he called Eudaimonia. This virtue is centered on the individual well-being. An ideal human being, he explained, is that person that possessed eudaimonia. Plato further explained that for one to achieve eudaimonia, they need to have what he called arete, or excellence. In other words, for one to get to the state of eudaimonia, you have to possess arete. It is a character trait that leads to eudaimonia life. I think this is the major reason why most of Plato's ethics try to explain the meaning of arete, a set of virtue that will enable one to arrive in eudaimonia life. It is a perfect kind of virtue. In fact, it is synonymous to excellence. That is, if you really understand what arete is, you will as well understand what eudaimonia is. So the question is, what is Eret? Plato questioned whether some positive character traits we often talk about, like courage, can be identified as a part of Eret. Thus, in the word of Plato, being courageous is a part of being virtuous. If this is the case, that courage is part of virtue, then we would hardly call a cowardly person's life eudaimonia or virtuous, no matter how pleasing their action may look. As he continued in his search on how to achieve eudaimonious life, Plato added that Eret is a pure knowledge or excellence of knowledge, what he described as knowledge of knowledge itself. A person cannot even know what Eret really is without knowing the form of the good itself. And so, the greatest good comes from knowing the measure of one's own knowledge. This, I suppose, is what the modern philosophers called propositional knowledge. Knowledge of all things is important, Plato explained, but the most important knowledge is knowledge of knowledge itself. He considered this to be the ultimate virtue and a necessary component for any individual to achieve eudaimonia. Other qualities, traits he identified as necessary condition for achieving eudaimonious life, like justice, luck, wealth, courage, temperance, etc. This means that in the word of Plato, virtue is not just a well-behaved quality. If you lack any of the above traits, such as courage, luck, wealth, justice, temperance, etc., you lack virtue. These are the qualities we expect to find in the moral status of the moral agent. Question 2b. Critical examination of the relevance of virtue ethics in our contemporary society. Aristotle Ethics. Aristotle believed that we study ethics in order to improve our lives. So the main reason we study ethics is to know the nature of our well-being. He began by explaining that there are different opinions about what is best for us. Thus, to profit from ethical inquiry, we must resolve these differences. Ethics is not a theoretical discipline, he said. We ask what is good for human beings, not because we want to have knowledge, but because we will be able to achieve our good if we develop a fuller understanding of what is it to flourish. He agreed with his predecessor, Socrates and Plato, that virtues are central to a well-lived life. Like Plato, he regards the ethical virtues, justice, courage, temperance, and so on, as a complex rational, emotional, and social skills. But he rejects Plato's idea that to be completely virtuous, one must study virtue through sciences, mathematics, and philosophy to have a clear understanding of what goodness is. What we need in order to live well is to appreciate the way such goods as friendship, pleasure, honor, and wealth fit together as a whole, and then acquire through proper upbringings and habits the ability to see on each occasion what course of action is best supported by reasons, in order to apply that general understanding to particular cases. Therefore, practical wisdom cannot be acquired merely by learning the general rules. We must also acquire through practicing those deliberative, emotional, and social skills that enables us to put our general understanding of well-being into practice in ways that are suitable to each occasion. When asked what is good, Aristotle explained that good, for example, is to have friends, to experience pleasure, to be healthy, to be honored, and to have such virtues as courage, at least to some degree. To Aristotle, a search for the good is a search for the highest good, and he assumed that the highest good, whatever it turns out to be, has three characteristics. It is desirable for itself, it is not desirable for the sake of some other good, and all other goods are desirable for its sake. He thinks that the Greek words eudaimonia, which means happiness, and eris, which means living well, designate such an end. Note that the word eudaimonia is coined from two Greek words, eu meaning well and domen meaning divinity or connected to the gods. This means that to be eudaimon is to be living in a way that is well favored by the gods. According to Aristotle, eudaimonia is a substitute for living well. No one tries to live well for the sake of some further goal. Rather, being eudaimonia is the highest end, and all subordinate goals like health, wealth, and others such as resources are sought because they promote well-being, not because they are what well-being consists of. But unless we can determine which goods happiness consists in, it is of little use to acknowledge that it is the highest end. Now, to determine this highest end, Aristotle asks, what is the function, task, works of a human being? He argues that it consists in activity of the rational part of the soul in accordance with virtue. The soul, according to him, is analyzed into a connected series of capacities. The nutritive soul is responsible for growth and reproduction, the locomotive soul for motion, the perceptive soul for perception, and so on and so forth. The biological facts Aristotle makes use of is that human beings are the only species that has not only this lower capacity, but a rational soul as well. The good of a human being must have something to do with being human. And what set human off from other species, giving us the potential to live a better life, is our capacity to guide ourselves by using reason. If we use reason well, we live well as human beings. Or, to be more precise, using reason well over the course of a full life is what happiness consists in. Doing anything well requires virtue or excellence, and therefore living well consists in activities caused by the rational soul in accordance with virtue or excellence. I believe by now we should understand who is a true virtuous person. In a nutshell, a virtuous soul is that person who has the tendency to use reason well. Our ability to use our reasoning faculty very well over the course of our full life is what happiness consists in. This is so because without rationality, there is no difference between us and the other animals. Thus he said, the good of a human being must have something to do with being human, and what sets humanity off from other species gives us the potential to live a better life is our capacity to guide ourselves by using reason. Now, get Aristotle clear. He says not that happiness is virtue, but that it is a virtuous activity. Living well consists in doing something, not just being in a certain state or condition. It consists in those lifelong activities that actualize the virtue of the rational part of the soul. In fact, this lifelong activity, according to Aristotle, is the possession of other goods, that the rational part of human being is the possession of other goods such as friends, wealth, and power, and one's happiness is endangered if one is severely lacking in certain advantage. For example, one is extremely ugly or has lost children or good friends through death. But why so? If one's ultimate end should simply be virtuous activities, then why should it make any difference to one's happiness whether one has or lack this other type of goods? Aristotle's reply is that one's virtuous activity will be to some extent diminished or defective if one lack an adequate supply of other goods. Someone who is friendless, childless, powerless, weak, and ugly will simply not be able to find many opportunities for virtuous activities over a long period of time, and what little he can accomplish will not be of great merit to some extent. Then living well requires good fortune. Happenstances can rob even the most excellent human being of happiness. Nonetheless, Aristotle insists the highest good, virtuous activity is not something that comes to us by chance. Although we must be fortunate enough to have parents and fellow citizens who help us become virtuous, we ourselves share much of the responsibility for acquiring and exercising the virtues. Now, when we look at these great thinkers, Plato and Aristotle, you notice that they sound very alike in their notion of virtue. Aristotle holds with Plato that the life of virtue is rewarding for the virtuous as well as beneficial for the community. Aristotle also agreed that the highest and the most satisfying form of human existence involves the exercise of one's rational faculties to the fullest extent. He conceived of the universe as a hierarchy in which everything has a function. Again, these two thinkers established to us that the highest form of exercise is the life of a rational being, and who are those that possess this rational ability? They are human beings. This means that as a human, you should prove it by your ability to use reason. Aristotle further states that the function of the lower being is to serve this form of life, that is, the life of the rational being. From this perspective, Aristotle defended slavery because he considered barbarians less rational than Greeks and by nature suited to be living tools. Now, you can see the reason why some of the ancient philosophers consider blacks to be lower species of human being because they consider the whites more rational being than the blacks. From this perspective also come a view of a human nature and an ethical theory derives from it. All living things, Aristotle held, have inherent potentialities, which is their nature to develop. This is the form of life properly suited to them and constitutes their goal. What, however, is the potentiality of human being? For Aristotle, this question turns out to be equivalent to asking what is distinctive about human beings, and this, of course, is the capacity to reason. The ultimate goal of humans, therefore, is to develop their reasoning power. When they do this, they are living well in accordance with their true nature, and they will find this the most rewarding exercise possible. The life of the intellect is the most rewarding existence, he added. Now, bringing Aristotle's notion on virtue ethics to our contemporary society. What are the benefits of virtue ethics to today's society? Virtue ethics teaches us that the end justifies the means. That is, your end as a rational being, as someone who applies reason to things you do, will justify whether you've attended the highest good, virtuous activity, or eudaimonic life or not. Aristotle distinguished between theoretical and practical wisdom. His conception of practical wisdom is significant, for it involves more than merely choosing the best means to whatever end or goals one may have. The practically wise person also has the right end. This implies that one's ends are not purely a matter of good desire or feeling. The right ends are something that can be known and reasoned about. Aristotle said that this view was plainly at variance with the observed facts, and he often instilled a detailed account of the ways in which one can fail to act on one's knowledge of the goods, including the failure that results from lack of self-control and the failure caused by weakness of will.
Thank you for viewing. Up next is, what is normative ethical relativism, and why do we think ethical absolutism is better than ethical relativism? It promises to be very, very informative and educative. Please don't miss it. Umeta Tabansi, Mikael. See you soon. Bye.